Around 24,000 years ago, something happened that should not have been possible. Human beings walked deliberately into a frozen world that every law of biology said should kill them within days. Massive ice sheets had buried much of the northern hemisphere beneath glacial walls, stretching kilometers into the sky. Temperatures dropped low enough to freeze exposed flesh in under 4 minutes. Winds screaming down from the ice sheets could strip thermal energy from the human body faster than metabolism could replace it. By every rule of evolutionary biology, humans should have retreated south toward warmth, toward safety, toward survival. Instead, they moved north. Not because they were physically stronger than the megafauna dying around them, not because some genetic mutation made them biologically cold resistant, but because something had profoundly changed in what it meant to be human. For millions of years, survival meant biological adaptation across thousands of generations. But during the Deep Ice Age, humans began doing something entirely new. They began adapting environments to themselves. And the frozen plains between Siberia and Alaska became the proving ground where this revolutionary strategy was tested under extinction-level pressure. Because what happened in Beringia was not just a migration, it was the first time in the history of life on Earth that a single species proved it could survive anywhere on the planet. At the peak of the last glacial maximum, around 21,000 years ago, global sea levels had fallen by more than 120 meters, as vast quantities of ocean water became locked inside continental ice sheets. This exposed an enormous landmass connecting northeastern Asia with northwestern North America across what is today the Bering Strait. We call it the Bering Land Bridge, but that name dramatically undersells what it actually was. This was not a narrow crossing or a frozen causeway. This was an entire lost continent. At its maximum extent, Beringia stretched nearly 1,600 kilometers from north to south and covered a surface area larger than modern France and Germany combined. It formed a massive, cold-adapted grassland that scientists call the Mammoth steppe, one of the most biologically productive environments of the entire Ice Age. Enormous herds of woolly mammoth, steppe bison, wild horses, and vast caribou migrations all lived across these grasslands. For a skilled hunter-gatherer group, Beringia was not a wasteland. It was a continent full of prey. But survival here demanded precision that left no room for error. Winter temperatures regularly fell below -40 degrees Celsius. Wind chill during storm events could push effective temperatures to -60. During winter solstice, usable daylight lasted fewer than 4 hours. This was an environment where a single misjudgment could cascade into death within hours. Entering this world successfully required something no human population had ever attempted at this scale: total technological environmental adaptation. Genetic research using ancient DNA has allowed scientists to reconstruct the migration history of the first Americans with remarkable precision. The ancestral population that would eventually produce all Native American peoples appears to have diverged from East Asian populations roughly 25,000 years ago. But instead of immediately pushing into the Americas, these groups paused. For perhaps 8,000 to 10,000 years, small human populations remained in Beringia itself, unable to move east because glacial ice still blocked the interior of North America, and unable to retreat west because competing populations had already filled those territories. Scientists call this the Beringian Standstill hypothesis. Mitochondrial DNA lineages found exclusively among Native American populations show mutation accumulations consistent with prolonged isolation before dispersal. Population genetic modeling suggests the founding group's effective breeding population may have dropped as low as 1,000 to 2,000 people at certain points. Imagine the entire genetic future of 2 continents balanced on fewer people than fit inside a small sports arena. This bottleneck created intense selective pressure. Traits and behaviors that improved survival propagated rapidly through such a small gene pool. The Beringian standstill was not merely a pause in a migration story. It was a multi-generational pressure cooker in which the technological and social systems of the first Americans were forged and refined against extinction-level stress for thousands of years. The first and most critical breakthrough was what we can legitimately call thermal engineering. An unclothed human being loses body heat approximately 25 times faster in cold air than in a temperate environment. At -30 degrees Celsius with moderate wind, an exposed human can lose consciousness from hypothermia in under 30 minutes. Without insulation trapping warm air against the skin, Arctic survival is measured not in days, but in hours. Biological evolution had given humans almost nothing useful for this problem. We have no thick fur, no subcutaneous fat reserves comparable to polar bears, no physiological cold tolerance beyond basic shivering. But Ice Age humans solved this problem technologically, and the solution they developed rivals anything modern materials science has produced. Archaeological discoveries from Siberia have recovered eyed bone needles dating back at least 40,000 years. This seemingly simple invention allowed the construction of fitted, multi-layered clothing using precisely cut and sewn animal hides. These garments used layered fur with inner and outer layers oriented in opposing directions to trap insulating air while shedding moisture. Experimental archaeology testing of reconstructed Ice Age clothing has shown thermal resistance values comparable to modern extreme cold military gear rated for -50 degrees Celsius. For the first time in evolutionary history, a species had completely decoupled its thermal survival from its own biology. Humans had begun outsourcing their survival envelope to technology, and that shift changed everything. The second breakthrough was shelter design, and what Ice Age humans built was far more sophisticated than the word shelter normally implies. Excavations at sites like Mezherik in Ukraine, dating to between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago, have revealed dwellings constructed from mammoth bones, with single structures incorporating bones from up to 95 individual mammoths, arranged in precise architectural patterns. Curved mammoth skull foundations formed circular wind-resistant base rings. Interlocked jaw bones and femurs created structural wall frameworks. Semi-subterranean floor construction, with the living area dug 50 to 80 centimeters into the earth, exploited the thermal stability of ground temperature, which stays near zero even when surface air is -40. Central hearth placement created deliberate thermal zoning throughout the interior. Entry tunnels with right-angle turns reduced direct wind penetration. These were not primitive shelters. These were engineered, controlled environments built by people applying systems thinking to the problem of staying alive, manipulating geometry, material properties, ground physics, and airflow dynamics simultaneously. Instead of evolving new biological bodies to fit new environments, humans had begun designing new habitats to fit their existing bodies. That shift is the earliest recognizable ancestor of everything we would later call civilization. The third breakthrough was energy management. And in the Arctic, energy management is not a convenience, but a survival calculation that must balance correctly every single day. Maintaining core temperature at 37 degrees Celsius when ambient air is -35 requires caloric combustion well beyond baseline metabolic needs. Estimates suggest humans in full cold stress conditions may require 4,000 to 6,000 kilocalories per day, roughly double or triple normal requirements. But Beringia had almost no wood. The tree line during the last glacial maximum sat hundreds of kilometers south of where humans were actually living. Ice Age humans responded with fuel diversification that demonstrates genuine innovative thinking. Archaeological sites show animal fat burned in shallow stone lamp vessels with twisted plant fiber wicks. Rendered mammoth fat burns hot and with low smoke production. Dried herbivore dung from mammoth and bison functioned as a reliable open-air fuel source. The fat lamp may have been among the most transformative technologies of the entire Paleolithic. Experiments with replica stone lamps have demonstrated sustained combustion for over 24 continuous hours from a single filling, producing enough light to work by and enough heat to raise the temperature of a small enclosed space. Even during the 2 zero-hour winter nights of high-latitude Beringia, humans could maintain productive activity. Tool production, clothing repair, food processing, and knowledge transmission could all continue after dark. Time itself had become an engineered resource, and the species that could manufacture usable time held a survival advantage that had no biological equivalent anywhere in the animal kingdom. But no amount of thermal engineering or shelter design could sustain survival across a continent-sized landscape without the one resource that ultimately matters most in extreme environments: accurate information. Ice Age humans moving across Beringia were operating without maps, without compasses, without any external information storage beyond what could be encoded in human memory and transmitted through human teaching. Modern research into traditional Arctic indigenous knowledge systems has revealed just how sophisticated landscape literacy can become without technological instruments. Inuit and Yupik navigational systems incorporate wind direction and texture, snow surface crystal structure, animal track patterns, star position variations, and bird flight trajectories into integrated navigational frameworks that allow reliable travel across featureless terrain in whiteout conditions. What Ice Age Beringians were building, generation by generation, was essentially a distributed survival database. Every elder who taught a younger hunter how to read snow compaction to find mammoth trails was adding an entry. Every parent who showed a child which route survived winter under the permafrost was encoding another line into humanity's collective survival program. Scientists call this cumulative culture, and it may be the single most powerful adaptation in the entire history of life on Earth. Cumulative culture is the system by which each generation inherits not just genes but solved problems, tested strategies, and refined technologies from every generation that survived before it. No other species does this with anything approaching human depth or fidelity. And this system, more than clothing, more than fire, more than shelter, is what made the crossing of Beringia not just possible, but in retrospect, almost inevitable. Around 16,500 years ago, the planetary climate began its long, irregular turn toward the warmer world we inhabit today. The massive ice sheets sealing the interior of North America began their slow, catastrophic retreat. Two potential pathways into the Americas gradually opened. An interior corridor between the two retreating ice sheets may have become passable by around 15,000 years ago, running south through what is today Alberta and Montana. A coastal Pacific route may have opened even earlier, supported by rich kelp forest ecosystems, sustaining maritime hunter-gatherers moving south in small watercraft. What followed is one of the most extraordinary events in the entire history of vertebrate life. Within only 2,000 to 3,000 years, human beings spread from the northern tip of Alaska to the southern tip of South America, covering more than 13,000 kilometers and colonizing virtually every ecosystem type on two continents simultaneously. Monteverde in southern Chile has been reliably dated to 14,500 years ago. The Paisley Caves in Oregon have yielded human remains dated to 14,300 years ago. The Deborah L. Friedkin site in Texas has produced stone tools dated to 15,500 years ago, potentially predating the corridor entirely. No other large terrestrial mammal has ever achieved continental colonization at this speed. Wolves took over 200,000 years to spread from their origin point to global distribution. Humans covered two continents in under 3,000 years. This was not migration in any ordinary biological sense. This was operational expansion at a speed the rest of the biosphere had never witnessed. What made this expansion possible was not individual physical capability, but social architecture, the invisible load-bearing structure of human cooperative networks. Survival in extreme environments is fundamentally a problem of information redundancy and risk distribution. A single family group in an unfamiliar ecosystem faces catastrophic risk from unpredictable failures, a hunting season that comes late, an injury that removes the primary hunter, a winter that extends 3 weeks longer than expected. but networked groups that share food, share knowledge, and maintain alliances across multiple geographic areas transform this equation entirely. A bad hunting season for one group becomes survivable if allied groups 2 days travel away share surplus. Archaeological evidence from the Upper Paleolithic consistently shows cooperation networks extending across hundreds of kilometers. Rare stone types found far from their geological source, decorative materials from distant coastal environments at inland sites, stylistic consistency and tool technologies across regions too large for a single group to occupy. These are the material signatures of maintained social relationships and deliberate alliance networks. Human dominance on Earth may not derive primarily from individual intelligence. It may derive from the unprecedented depth and geographic reach of human cooperative networks. The individual human is a fragile, slow, fangless, clawless primate with no natural weapons. The human network is something else entirely. It is the most resilient survival system that biology has ever produced. There is a deeper pattern running through this entire story, visible only when you step back far enough to see what the Ice Age was actually testing. Climate instability during the last glacial maximum was not a single sustained cold event. Ice core records from Greenland reveal violent climatic oscillations with rapid warming episodes called Dansgaard-Oeschger events occurring roughly every 1,500 years and causing temperature swings of up to 15 degrees Celsius within decades. Entire ecosystems could be dismantled within a human lifetime. Species perfectly optimized for the mammoth steppe, including the mammoths themselves, ultimately could not adapt quickly enough when Holocene warming eliminated their primary habitat. Humans responded by doing something that contradicts standard evolutionary logic. Instead of becoming more perfectly adapted to any single environment, they became more flexibly adapted to many. Groups that had been mammoth hunters developed broader spectrum foraging when mammoth populations declined. Coastal groups developed watercraft and marine mammal hunting. High-altitude groups developed cold-adapted plant processing. Each adaptive shift happened within centuries, driven not by genetic change, but by cultural change, by the rapid generation and transmission of new behavioral strategies through cumulative culture. Humans had become high-performance generalists, capable of operating effectively across the full range of environments the planet offered. And in an unstable climate, where the environment itself was the primary cause of extinction, the ability to change faster than the world changed became the ultimate competitive advantage. By 13,000 years ago, humans occupied the majority of habitable territory across both American continents. From a founding population numbering perhaps only a few thousand individuals, isolated in Beringia during the worst centuries of the last glacial maximum, came populations that would eventually number in the tens of millions before European contact, expressing extraordinary diversity across environments ranging from Arctic tundra to equatorial rainforest to high-altitude Andean plateau. What the Beringian founders demonstrated was that human survival was no longer primarily a function of biological fitness in any traditional Darwinian sense. It was a function of technological capacity, social network depth, and adaptive flexibility. A small group of anatomically modern humans, physically indistinguishable from any person alive today, survived a planetary climate crisis that drove dozens of megafauna species to extinction, crossed a continent-sized landscape of lethal cold, and colonized 2 entirely new continents in a geological eye blink. They did this with stone tools, bone needles, animal hide clothing, fat lamps, and each other. The real achievement was not reaching America. The real achievement was proving that human survival could scale, that the same systems allowing 1,000 people to survive in Beringia could allow millions to survive anywhere on Earth. Today, Beringia is gone. The land bridge was submerged beneath the Bering Strait approximately 11,000 years ago, erasing the physical evidence of the crossing beneath cold Pacific water. The mammoths that grazed those grasslands are gone. The steppe bison, the Beringian horses, the woolly rhinoceros, all extinct, but the humans who crossed that bridge did not disappear. Their descendants inherited 2 continents and eventually inherited the entire planet. The real bridge was never made of land. It was made of knowledge, transmitted forward through the most powerful information system biology has ever evolved: human culture. The cooperative networks that sustained small bands through Ice Age winters became the social templates for cities and civilizations. The cumulative knowledge that allowed each generation to inherit solved problems from all previous generations became the foundation of science itself. That discovery, forged in the coldest landscape the Ice Age had to offer, is the reason you are here. Not because your ancestors were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were the first species on Earth that could look at an existential threat and see, instead of a wall, an engineering problem waiting to be solved. If you want more deep dives into prehistoric human survival, Ice Age civilizations, and the hidden systems that built our species, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows. Because the real story of prehistory is not about how humans survived the world. It is about how humans learned to survive anything.